So just one day after posting my M10 Monochrom video, the camera finally arrived on my doorstep. I had a chance to shoot with it, work on some files in Lightroom, and gain some better insight. So just as I promised, stick around and we'll get into it. I don't want to rehash info that we already covered in the last M10 Monochrom video, so if you haven't seen that yet, go check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now, for this video, we're going to keep things short and sweet and show a lot of images. I didn't have a ton of time to shoot with the M10 Monochrom, but certainly enough to get a feel for the camera. First, let's talk about the shooting experience. Now, having shot extensively with the Leica M10 and M10P, the M10 Monochrom felt extremely familiar. One run through of the menu just to make sure my settings were dialed in, and I was pretty much ready to go. You know, there were a few small differences in the menu itself, but nothing that wasn't self-explanatory. But yeah, just like the M10P, the camera feels great in the hand. It's a little tough to describe if you haven't held an M, but it's lightweight, yet solid and dense at the same time. Very confidence-inspiring. On the technical side of it, live view was snappy, the eye sensor was quick to switch over to the EVF, and even in very low light, I found the EVF image gain really nicely and cleanly, and it didn't get super jittery. Image zooming and scrolling around the image using the rear touchscreen was quick and responsive, and ultimately, just overall, the camera was a pleasure to use. My first go-around shooting was in downtown Coral Gables. I figured a Saturday night seemed like it might make for some halfway decent street shooting and give me a chance to test out some of the low light ability of the camera. So I grabbed my usual go-to set of M lenses, a 24mm LMAR for wide angle, 35mm Summilux, 50mm Apo Summicron, and a 90 Summarit. I threw them in a shoulder bag with an extra battery and a Visiflex 020 EVF, and I was ready to hit the road. Now, having shot a considerable amount with the M Monochrom Type 246, I was also familiar with the Monochrom's propensity for blowing out the highlights. See, in a color camera, you'll often have some information in one of the 3 color channels, even if the other 2 of them are blown out. You can then use that highlight recovery tool in Lightroom or Photoshop to pull the detail back into your image. But since there's only one channel in the monochrome, if a highlight's blown out, it's gone for good. And it's not the best look in the world. So my workaround here, just as on the previous 2 generations of monochrome, is to always err on the side of underexposure, as you have several stops of shadow recovery versus basically 0 on the highlights. Now, I quickly found out in the monochrome, sometimes that meant dialing in -1, -2, or even -3 EV on some really contrasty scenes. Then in some cases, I even wished the EV range went less than -3 because I had to switch into full manual to override. But I'd say for most of my shooting, A mode or aperture priority worked just fine. The EVF with highlight and shadow warnings enabled helped me spot possible trouble, then a turn of the rear thumb wheel let me quickly tweak the exposure compensation. Overall, the first experience worked out pretty well. Now, I'm not the world's best street photographer by any measure, but even I was happy with a decent number of shots, so maybe it's the camera. Now, downloading the first batch of images, I started to get a feel for how the camera performed at different ISO settings and with the different lenses. But I still didn't know how it might perform in daytime shooting, because clearly the camera is not just meant for night shooting. So I had one last opportunity to take some pictures at an equestrian center while my daughter was attending a riding lesson. The barn's mixed lighting made for some challenges, let's say, but ultimately the M10 Monochrom handled everything in stride. And even though I was looking to test daylight shooting and daylight conditions, of course, I found myself shooting again at higher ISO settings, especially in the darker corners of the barn towards the end of the day. So, how did it do? Ultimately, I think that the hypothesis I put forward in the previous video proved to be true, which is to say that the M10 Monochrom offers about 1.5 to 2 stops better ISO performance than its predecessor, the M Monochrom Type 246. Where the 246 started losing serious steam past ISO 10,000, the M10 Mono just is opening up the throttle. Files in the 5 to 10,000 range look impressively clean and detailed. Pushing up towards 20,000, images still maintain a dynamic feel with tons of detail and still retain a lot of malleability in post. Pressing on to ISO 32,000, images are getting a little bit on the grainy side but still maintain impressive tonality, and that's really fine grain. Approaching redline at 50,000. Yeah, images are still decent. Not amazing, but definitely not terrible by any measure. Contrast drops a bit, details are sacrificed due to noise and the requisite noise reduction. But if I had to choose between no image at all and the results I was getting at ISO 50,000, the choice would be an easy one. Then I didn't venture to ISO 100,000 territory, as I just didn't feel I'd be willing to accept anything less than I was getting at ISO 50,000, but take that for what it's worth because that's just the perfectionism in me talking. When I get around to doing controlled testing in studio, sure, I'll see how it goes. I'm going to test the whole range from 160 to 100,000, but for real-world shooting, I honestly didn't feel the need, especially as I never once felt constrained within the shooting envelope. I used auto ISO the whole time, and often didn't even realize what ISO I was shooting until I got the images into the computer. I mean, when you're using the optical finder, there is no ISO display, so it was just what worked. Now, something worth noting is that the file quality here is a bit tough to gauge definitively because the M10 Monochrom is not yet officially supported in the current versions of Adobe Camera Raw, ACR, or Lightroom. Now, hopefully updates are on the way because in the past, I've seen huge jumps in apparent image quality when Adobe rolled out official profiles. So I know that image quality will only improve from here, which is kind of amazing as the files already look incredible. Unfortunately, sizing down to only 4K resolution and dealing with YouTube's aggressive compression algorithms, the images here on screen just don't do the camera justice. Like others have noted, the M10 Monochrom turns out medium format image quality in a compact 35 package. Also, as far as noise goes, just to loop back to that, the M10 Monochrom's noise profile is actually quite pleasant and very reminiscent of film. For those looking to replicate a Tri-X look, for instance, just set the camera to ISO 10 to 20,000 and fire away. If you're after the ultra clean tech pan look, anything under ISO 5,000, crazy, should look completely noise free. At ISO 1,000 and under, think 4x5. Now, there's been some concern about using a high megapixel camera with zero image stabilization, including my own. I've seen what a game changer in-body image stabilization's been in the SL2 with its 47 megapixel. And while the M10 Monochrom has a few less at 40, it's still packing some serious resolution, so the concern is a real one. But what I found that setting up auto ISO to never drop below a shutter speed of say 1/250th of a second, combined with the rock solid body and the well dampened shutter, I didn't get any motion blur at all. Here, the camera's absurdly good high ISO performance let me always shoot at fast shutter speeds and stop down when I needed to for additional depth of field. In the dark. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Anyway, that about wraps up my thoughts on the M10 Monochrom for now. I can't wait to get out and use the camera some more, but I can say with confidence that 1, this is a meaningful and worthy upgrade over the already outstanding M246 Monochrom, and 2, probably the best tool for black and white photography I've ever used. Anyway, thanks for watching. As always, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this. If you're more of a reading type, head to red.forum.com for the latest Leica news, in-depth reviews, technical articles, and more. Until then, we'll see you in the next video.